Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us on Night with the Experts. This is a monthly program by Nuclear Energy Information Service in Chicago, where we bring experts to you so you have an opportunity to interact with them, ask questions, get to know them, and share information back and forth. My name is Dave Kraft. I'm director of NEIS, and we do this program on the last Thursday of each month, so we hope you will join us next month as well. This is a particularly important program tonight by accident, more or less, in the sense that we are dealing with the issue of nuclear power and weapons in a time of rising tension. The news today was that members of the Russian government is talking about doing a demonstration of nuclear weapons, not aimed at any particular place, but just to show that they know how to do it. So this is a very tense time with Ukraine, with the Middle East, and our guests tonight, friends of ours, Helen and Gerry and Gerry Condon from Veterans for Peace, are certainly appropriate experts for the evening, so we hope you'll have a good time. So I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, board member Jan Budart, and she will introduce the experts for the evening.
Hi, everybody, and thanks a lot for coming. I would introduce the experts by reading their bios, but their bios are on the invitation, and I wanted to more go into my impression. They did a really enormous great loop and started in Minneapolis, went down to the Ohio River, and from there entered the Gulf of Mexico through Mobile, Alabama. Then they went around Florida and up the East Coast into the Hudson River, taking in the Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, Lake Huron, and then came down through Lake Michigan and ended in Chicago, where we met them in person and where we sponsored some events with them. And we went to the National Veterans Art Museum and took a architecture tour of Chicago on the river, and had other kinds of experiences that were very, very interesting and fun. So I'm happy to introduce Helen Gerry and Gerry Condon, who are directors of the Veterans for Peace Golden Rule Peace Boat Project. And so I'm going to turn the time over to them. They'll be talking for about half an hour. Then we will have a Q&A that lasts about an hour, we're hoping. And so anyway, I'm going to turn the time now over to Helen and Gerry.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you to NEIS, the board of directors, Dave Kraft and Jan Budart for having us today, and whoever's going to do the video editing and getting that up as well. There's a technical things that go on behind the scenes, and we're grateful for every one of the people that's working hard on this project. So I'm going to talk about, yes, the golden rule, but also some introductory material so that you have everything in context. So now I'm going to share my screen with you. This is the golden rule, as it was right in front of Honolulu in 2019. This is who we are. You already have this information. The Golden Rule is a national project of Veterans for Peace. We have 100 U.S. chapters, some international chapters, and around 3,000 members. This is a group of veterans and supporters. You don't have to be a veteran to join, who are against all war and who work towards exposing the true cost of war. In the Veterans for Peace statement of purpose are two things that particularly resonate with the Golden Rule Project and with the Veterans for Peace Nuclear Abolition Working Group, which is to restrain our governments from intervening overtly and covertly in the internal affairs of other nations, and to end the arms race and to reduce and eventually eliminate nuclear weapons. So these two sub-organizations are the embodiment of achieving the attempt to achieve these two goals. Veterans for Peace nationally has endorsed abolishing nuclear power as well as nuclear weapons. As early as 2011 at the VFP National Convention, it was stated that we want to see nuclear power done away with. The background for the Golden Rule is that by 1958, the United States had used 67 nuclear bombs in the Marshall Islands. The bombs were producing contamination in the air. This was getting into mother's milk and cow's milk and was blowing all over the planet, but particularly the Northern Hemisphere. After many attempts to stop the nuclear tests, a group of Quakers bought the Golden Rule, and this was 1958, and they attempted to sail it right into the nuclear testing zone in the Marshall Islands. The Coast Guard decided to not allow them to go beyond Honolulu and arrested the crew, and they spent 2 months in jail. These arrests sparked a very increased size of the anti-nuclear movement at the time. People were protesting on the streets and doing marches to stop the nuclear testing and let the crew of the Golden Rule sail. Another boat did make it from Honolulu to the Marshall Islands, the Phoenix of Hiroshima. After this action, the boat was sold to private hands and wasn't seen again until 2010 when she was brought up onto the beach in far northern California, Humboldt Bay, with a couple of big holes in her side. So a committee was formed to restore the Golden Rule, and now it has been restored. And the of the Golden Rule project, as written in 2011, the original nuclear protest vote, the Golden Rule, sails to promote for a nuclear-free future, dangers of radiation to humanity and the environment, and to support peaceful alternatives to war. I want to point out, therefore, especially since this was written in 2011, it absolutely includes not only nuclear weapons, but also nuclear power and the entire nuclear chain. We relaunched in 2015. In 2016, we sailed the waters of the Pacific Northwest, and then we also sailed down to Southern California 3 or 4 times. And in 2024, we're going back to the Pacific Northwest. We also spent almost 2 years in the Hawaiian Islands, trying once again to get to the Marshall Islands, but once again, we were stopped this time due to COVID. So we brought the Golden Rule back to California and began the Great Loop. And you can see a map of it here where we did go down the center of the country, around the tip of Florida, and visited Cuba, all the way up to Portland, Maine, and then back to New York, up the Hudson River, through the Erie Canal, all around the Great Lakes, and finally ended up in Chicago, where we put the Golden Rule on again on a truck and brought her back to California. One of the most memorable times that we had was going into Dubuque, Iowa, where there's a community of Marshallese people, and they greeted the boat with beautiful harmonies in traditional dress. And we danced and had speeches and food, and it was a very meaningful interaction. One of our Veterans for Peace board members was at the helm when we came into Hemingway Marina in Cuba. And there's our delegation. Half of them came by land and half by sea. When we got back to Miami, we did a nice little demonstration against the blockade of Cuba. And then we went up to Kings Bay, where we demonstrated against the Trident nuclear-armed submarines. We had parties in the park, commemorate, of course, the Castle Bravo destructive test of the nuclear weapons on the Marshall Islands. We had mayors and city councils welcome us. This inspires art. We had several different kinds of protests against the parade of ships in New York City, against Groton, Connecticut electric boat where they make nuclear armed submarines, in Norfolk, Virginia, just putting up our sails in contrast to all of their military activities. And then at Bath Iron Works, the makers of multiple capable warships. We visited the United Nations and spent a couple of hours with the United Nations representative from the Republic of the Marshall Islands. A couple other things that happened were that we had a very warm welcome from the Pokanoket tribe in Rhode Island, and also we had, and of course, several other Indigenous welcomes. Also, were welcomed by brass bands and other ruckus activities. This was taken on the 4th of July. And just a couple pictures from going through the Erie Canal, since you guys are on the Great Lakes. This is what happens when you take the masts off of the Golden Rule to go underneath a bunch of bridges. And then coming into Toronto, this is what she looks like on the bottom when we need to do a repair. And then this was done by somebody in, I think, Traverse City or Chicago, anyway, or maybe Milwaukee. Anyway, this was a really nice graphic, and I really love it because it shows where it is that we went and where the nuclear activities are going on all around the Great Lakes. So this is probably my favorite graphic of all time. And again, we're going to the Pacific Northwest this year. We'll be leaving Eureka, California, approximately July 15th. Again, protesting against nuclear submarines near Seattle. Do some commemorations, lots of our normal kinds of activities. We'll be in 2 wooden boat shows, the Victoria Classic and the Port Townsend. We'll be in the Vancouver, Washington Peace Fair, and then we're going to stop by in Newport, Oregon on our way back home, hoping to be home around the end of September. And our program is to give presentations, do Fleet Week protests, day sales, boat tours. And the Golden Rule is a weapon of mass education. So we talk about, during our talks, nuclear weapons tests, the use of the nuclear weapons in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the lasting effects that this has on people and the environment, the threat of use and how that is just another way to use nuclear weapons by bullying other countries. We talk about the effects of a nuclear war, current dangers, as in the danger of nuclear war and exchanges with China, Russia, North Korea, possibly even Iran someday. And organizations that have sponsored us include Women's International and Freedom. I believe you remember Jan, and many people on this call may be. Physicians for Social Responsibility, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, Peace Action, Code Pink, Back from the Brink, World Beyond War, Roots Action, NuclearBan.us, People's Network for Planet Justice and Peace, Earthquaker Action Team, plus a lot of Quaker meetings, and United for Peace and Justice. And there's a lot that you can do. If you go on our website, you'll be able to see some of the actions that you can take at the city level, at national level, Congress, through the No Nukes Working Group, through divestment of talk to your cities and your pension funds, through direct action, and through writing, speaking, educating, and making music, getting all of this onto the media and social media. Gerry is going to talk with you about the Veterans for Peace Nuclear Abolition Working Group and the resulting nuclear posture review that came out of that.
Hi, everybody. Thanks again to Nuclear Energy Information Service for inviting us to have this conversation with you. It's an honor and a privilege, and gives us an opportunity to update some of our presentations. We also want to thank NEIS for hosting us in the Golden Rule in Chicago. That was actually the final stop of 103 city voyage. It took us over 12 months. And we had lots of wonderful activities in Chicago and some nearby communities there. So we really appreciate that. Great. We made a lot of new friends there, including Jan and David here. So thank you again. I want to say a little bit about my own background. I was born in 1947 in San Mateo, California. It's a suburb of San Francisco, into an Irish Catholic family. My father and both his brothers were World War II veterans and police officers. So you can imagine my training. I went to Catholic schools from kindergarten through my first 2 years and only years of college. Had a pretty good education. One of the things I really took away from my Catholic training was the whole concept of having the courage of one's conscience, the courage to do the right thing regardless of the consequences. And that concept served me really, really well when I was confronted with the Vietnam War. I was actually in the Army already and seriously doubting what was going on in Vietnam, and talking to Vietnam veterans returning, telling me about atrocities that U.S. troops were committing against Vietnamese civilians. So I said no. I was then ordered to Vietnam, refused orders to Vietnam, and I actually entered from Fort Bragg, Carolina, in the middle of my correctional, which ultimately sentenced me to 10 years at hard labor and a dishonorable discharge. But by that time, I was in Montreal, and then I headed for Europe. I left the US in February of '69, and by November, I was in Sweden. In Sweden, I joined along with other American deserters, mostly deserters, some draft resistors, in an organization called the American Deserters Committee. We worked closely with the Swedish peace movement. And also, we did actually meet with the Vietnamese who had an office. The Provisional Revolutionary Government of Vietnam had an office in Stockholm. We worked closely with a large, very active Swedish movement against the U.S. war in Vietnam, which was very welcoming to us. And we worked with the European peace movement as well in several international conferences to end the war in Vietnam. So I learned a lot in Sweden, and frankly, I was initially shocked to learn that my country, the United States, was not all about mom and apple pie, was not all about democracy and freedom. That was a shock to me, and that I had been lied to. And so then I began to learn about U.S. imperialism and about too many wars based on lies. So that's kind of my background. And although I've been a peace activist for about 55 years now, it's only in the last 10 years or so that I've specifically got involved with the anti-nuclear movement and movement for nuclear abolition. And that's largely through the experience of being one of the coordinators of the voyages of the Golden Rule. This is our 10th year of sailing the Golden Rule for a nuclear-free world and a peaceful, sustainable future. So it's been a great learning experience. Helen and I are also co-founders of the Nuclear Abolition Working Group of Veterans for Peace. And that has also been a very powerful educational experience for us for the last 3.5 years. It's been quite a few VFP members are involved in that, and we've been learning a lot together. And we were actually bold enough to take on the role of both student and teacher when 3 years ago, almost, I guess now, we decided to write our own Veteran for Peace Nuclear Posture Review. We've been waiting for Biden to come out with his. He had talked in the campaign about perhaps declaring a no first use policy. And his policy took a long time to come out, but when it finally did, he was actually declaring that the U.S. could use the first use, and not even against non-nuclear threats. So that was a big disappointment. But our own nuclear posture review covers a lot I sometimes feel there is a disconnect between the way we talk about abolishing nuclear weapons versus the reality that the U.S. maintains an ever-escalating and aggressive posture of global domination, seeking literally to dominate every region of the world, to eliminate regional strongmen, and to maintain military and economic superiority eternally against all the odds. So I was very excited about the nuclear posture review of Veterans for Peace. I think it incorporates a lot of these kind of realistic perspectives of what's going on with U.S. foreign policy and what that has to do with U.S. nuclear weapons and possibility, the growing danger of nuclear war. So I'm going to read a few little passages from the Veterans for Peace Nuclear Posture Review, which I think are helpful in grounding us here. To review, there are 14,000 nuclear bombs on the planet today, with 13,000 of them controlled by the US and Russia. The other 7 nuclear powers, China, France, the UK, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea, have little over 1,000 in all. It is clear then that if we are actually going to abolish nuclear weapons, it's up to the US and Russia to take the lead. With a U.S. proposed budget of nearly $2 trillion in the next 30 years for new bomb factories, new missiles, planes, submarines, and redesigned warheads, it's clear that the U.S. is not acting in good faith with the cessation of the arms race at an early date, as required by the 1970 Non-Proliferation Treaty, to which the U.S. is a signatory. The U.S. and Russia each maintain about 900 weapons on hair trigger alert, mounted on missiles poised and ready to fire. And since the 1950s, there have been countless accidents, near misses, airplane crashes carrying nuclear bombs, missing airplanes with nuclear weapons, and nuclear weapons sent to the wrong location, a whole parade of horrible near disasters. Want to briefly review the U.S. nuclear posture vis-a-vis Russia, China, and North Korea. And, the world has gone from 70,000 nuclear weapons during the height of the Cold War to the 14,000 on the planet today. So this was written, by the way, a couple of years ago, but it's still pretty accurate and up to date. So we do know how to reduce the arsenals by disabling the bombs under strict inspection and verification processes long established. However, the U.S. has numerous opportunities to cooperate with Russia over the years, starting at the end of World War II, when President Truman rejected pleas to turn the bomb over to the United Nations under international supervision. Subsequent U.S. actions either missed opportunities to reduce the risk or actually increased the risk of nuclear confrontation with Russia. And here's a few examples. President Reagan rejected President Gorbachev's offer to give up deployment of a Star Wars missile defense system in space as a condition for both countries to eliminate all their nuclear weapons. President Clinton refused President Putin's offer to cut our massive nuclear arsenals to 1,500 bombs each, and to call on all the other nuclear armed states to negotiate the elimination of nuclear weapons in exchange for the U.S. not placing missile sites in Romania. President George Bush walked out of the 1972 Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty and put a missile base in Romania. President Trump placed another missile base in Poland. President Bush in 2008 and President Obama in 2014 blocked any discussion of Russian and Chinese proposals for a space weapons ban. President Obama rejected President Putin's offer to negotiate a treaty to ban cyber war. President Trump pulled the U.S. out of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, and President Biden, as all the way from President Clinton to President Biden, the U.S. has never ratified the 1992 Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, which actually Russia has ratified. So something to think about. The U.S. is apparently not the one who's taking the lead in initiating actions towards nuclear disarmament. Quite the opposite. So the Nuclear Posture Review calls on the U.S. to re-implement the ABM treaty, to eliminate all missile defense systems, which are really more part of a first strike strategy than a real defense, to re-implement the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, to ratify the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, and to negotiate with Russia to reduce our nuclear arsenals to 1,000 nuclear weapons each. That's way too many. And call all the other parties to the table to negotiate for a treaty to abolish nuclear weapons. Similarly, and with China, China keeps approximately 300 nuclear warheads. Lately, the U.S. has accused them of doubling their nuclear warheads, and there may be some indications, although no verification yet, that they may in fact be increasing their nuclear capacity as the U.S. Stokes a war against China. But China does maintain a true no first use policy. China presents no threat of nuclear attack against the U.S. or its allies. However, the U.S. has encircled China with hundreds of military bases and has signaled a commitment to defend Taiwan's independence, counter to previous agreements with China made during the Nixon administration. The U.S. and the corporate media are generating a constant stream of anti-nuclear propaganda, anti-China propaganda. I wish it were anti-nuclear. Apparently preparing the U.S. public for a possible war with nuclear-armed China. This is a very dangerous and provocative situation. Veterans for Peace calls for an immediate halt to U.S. military exercises in the South China Sea, and recommends rescinding the nuclear submarine sale to Australia. The U.S. also has a very provocative policy towards North Korea, and continues to launch major war games, some of them described as quote unquote decapitation exercises, which means taking out the North Korean leadership. So Trump's little flirtation with him was not followed up with any serious action, and that whole hopeful moment disappeared all too quickly. Furthermore, the U.S. is expanding its space operations, fourth dimension of warfare, a race towards full spectrum dominance in space. Today's space power will be harnessed by the U.S. to ensure dominance over the satellite infrastructure that allows for the modern world of internet, e-commerce, GPS, telecommunications, surveillance, and warfighting. The Veterans for Peace calls for negotiated an international treaty to plug the gaps of the Outer Space Treaty and to make for a real policy of no nuclear weapons in space and no land-based weapons that can shoot down satellites. So the Nuclear Posture Review of Veterans for Peace makes 16 very specific recommendations for unilateral immediate posture changes the U.S. could make, for negotiations for nuclear disarmament, and for implementation of our treaty obligations. And it concludes that the world is a much more dangerous place with nuclear weapons, particularly given the current confrontations among nuclear-armed nations. Activist efforts to restrain U.S. militarism and intervention around the globe, cut the military budget, and encourage mutual respect and diplomacy among the nations must therefore go hand in hand with efforts to reduce and eliminate all nuclear weapons. And finally, I would say that we seek to build an intersectional movement for peace at home and peace abroad, to tie in with various struggles for racial justice, for non-intervention in the affairs of other nations, and for redirecting funds from the military and nuclear weapons to healthcare, education, and other human rights. We're making common cause with the burgeoning climate justice movement, proclaiming that climate catastrophe and nuclear war are the twin threats to life on Earth. And I would say, just to bring us up to date, that the US and NATO are currently locked in a proxy war against Russia and Ukraine, a truly tragic and unnecessary war that nonetheless has the potential to lead to a catastrophic nuclear war. The US obviously providing weapons and political cover for the ongoing and horrible real-time genocide that we are witnessing in Gaza. And of course, that is raising tensions throughout the Middle East, including with Iran. And there's once again a danger. Iran does not have nuclear weapons, by the way, but there is nonetheless a danger of that conflict in the Middle East going nuclear. In fact, a few Israeli leaders have gone so far as to suggest dropping a nuclear bomb on Gaza. For all practical purposes, they've done just about as much destruction as a nuclear bomb would do. And in the meantime, the U.S. is putting in place, as we speak, the pieces that would require, they believe are required to wage a successful war against China. So it's an extremely dangerous moment in history. And as David was saying earlier, it seems like the lunatics are running the asylum. We have very aggressive policies, neocons who seem to be dominating both Democratic and Republican administrations, who are determined to play nuclear chicken at the risk of a calamity for all of civilization. So this is what we're up against. And I guess my final comment would be the point I've been making. In order to reduce the risk, step back from the risk of nuclear war and have a realistic policy towards abolition of nuclear weapons, we need to also educate ourselves and challenge the extreme U.S. interventionist policies within which these nuclear weapons exist.
Thank you, Gerry. And thank you, Helen. I think you've
Pleasure.
I think you've really emphasized the slogan that the Golden Rule Peace Boat is what did you say? A weapon of mass education. And so
Right.
we really appreciate your being here and giving us this talk. So now, let's see. I wanted to.
Jan, the chat is disabled, but I do want to register that we do not all share these views, and I would put it in the chat, but it says chat disabled.
I
Can you-
just activated the chat.
Okay.
We usually keep it closed until the speakers are finished.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so I believe the chat is open now, and what I was going to say is everyone who is here is welcome to put their coordinates in the chat and to exchange information about themselves so that there can be communication outside of this meeting. And
I know, Jan, that many people here are concerned about nuclear energy, because of course that's the primary
yeah,
focus
that's our thrust, yeah.
for NEIS. So we may also want to talk more about the connections between nuclear energy and nuclear weapons.
Well, the people who are here now, it's their time, and they can ask whatever they want. And if they want to talk about the connection between nuclear power and nuclear weapons, that would be fine. And maybe you can direct some of the questions toward that subject. So I wanted to next go just through the basic rules of how the Q&A, how the question and answer goes. And so each person gets one question and one follow-up question, but not two different questions. You may ask your questions one at a time. And if there's time left over at the end of the meeting, we could call on you a second time. If you're making a comment or you have a very long question, I will cut you off after 3 minutes. So please keep your comments under control. And Do not ask a series of questions. Like I said, one question and one follow-up. Then I want to tell you how to get into the stack. Some of you are already familiar with the thing at the bottom that says reactions. It's a little emoji with a plus sign. And when you click on that, there's a bar that says raise your hand. And you will get this kind of a response. And I can call on you in order because the people who raise their hands appear in order on the screen. So that will help me. But if you don't want to do that, or it gets to you really seems difficult to you, you can raise your hand on your screen like this. I'll try to help you if I see that. And if I don't and somebody else sees it, please tell me. You can also get in the stack by putting the word in the chat, stack. And then I think David and some other people can help me figure out who actually has put stack in the stack, and we'll try to keep calling you in order. But the best way or the easiest way for me is for you to just go like this. Okay, so it looks like Roxanne there has the first question, and go ahead, Roxanne.
Hi, I also put it in the chat, and my name is Roxanne Thayer. I'm a member of the Washington State Democratic Central Committee. I live in Washington State, and I'm a state delegate. We have a solution regarding the problems with nuclear energy. Our governor just signed a $25 million grant to study SMNRs at Hanford, and you probably know Hanford is pretty filthy still. Every tribal leader in the state opposed that, and every legitimate environment opposed that. What are your thoughts on SMNRs? Do we fight that creeping, crawly? Basically, it's everything that coal and oil told us. It's brought to you by the same people as coal and oil. It's extractive, it's monopolistic, it's paternalistic. How do we fight it?
That's a great question. And I've seen in the last couple of weeks and months in the past, really good arguments about the small nuclear reactors, small modular reactors. Most of the problems that are experienced by the older reactors, that those problems still persist. That includes uranium mining and milling, and the resultant contamination that causes. And of course, no place to put the waste. Also, per unit of electricity, there's more concrete used and therefore further environmental degradation that way. And per unit of electricity, there is more dangerous and more quantity of nuclear waste produced in the SMRs. It might be true that an individual SMR will not melt down in the same way that Fukushima did, but there are still a lot of problems with it. Part of which is that the reason that the nuclear energy field exists at all is to keep enough people going through the nuclear engineering schools to provide plenty for both nuclear power, but also for nuclear weapons. So the chemical engineering school I was in also had a nuclear engineering school, and they feel like this is an important way to keep the pipeline going of educated people that can work on nuclear weapons.
Yeah, they're trying to make the small nuclear reactors seem like really safe, sustainable, and cool. There's quite a marketing effort going on there. I saw a really good film at the Uranium Film Festival. What was that called? Nuclear something, a word that means basically fraud.
Atomic
Atomic what?
boondoggle.
Atomic
Boondoggle.
boondoggle. I think there was a similar word. Anyway, it does a good job of exposing all that. I also understand that so far, none of these have been successful. I think it's important for us to push it's possible that it's going to collapse under its own economic unfeasibility.
In spite of its collapsing, for example, NewScale is an SMNR producer that was in Washington State. And like I said, just weeks ago, our governor signed $25 million over to electrical organizations that were counting on NewScale. NewScale is being sued by its private investors, private equity. Their building burned down and they left for the Philippines. So this is
Oh,
the
good.
kind of, yeah, this is the kind of crooked, I mean, extreme crooked. There's evidently only 2 semi-functioning SMNRs in the world. Anyway, so anything you have, get to David. David has my email. I could use all the help I can get. Our delegation, our state convention is the end of June. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, we
Right.
can do that.
Yeah, and I'm sure NEIS has a lot of useful information and resources there as well. But that's a good struggle. And by the way, we are going to be, the Golden Rule is coming to the Pacific Northwest this summer. We were there in 2016. We're going to be back again from, late July through the end of September. I'm going to be in many places, including, of course, Seattle and Tacoma and Fort Townsend and the Bangor Submarine Base. So it'd be great to meet you there.
I'll put my email address in the chat. My name is Roxanne. Definitely want to connect with you while you're in the Pacific Northwest. Thank you.
Well, we'd invite you to we'd come speak at one or more of our events about the SMNRs. That would be great.
And Roxanne, you can put the website of Hanford Challenge and the Columbia River Keepers for people who, these are 2 groups that are doing great work regarding the mess at Hanford. Hey, Dave.
I'm working with the River Keepers now.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah. So put their link in the chat. Okay, Dave, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to say off the bat, it's really great to see you both again. And we had a really wonderful time when you brought the boat here to Chicago last September. For us, it was an opportunity to do what I don't see a lot of, and that is crossover between the 2 aspects of the nuclear movements, namely nuclear weapons on the one hand, nuclear power on the other. I think even some of your crew members on the boat were very surprised what they learned and picked up on in the Great Lakes Basin when they were talking to the nuclear power people. So what I want to raise here is something we've encountered on Night with the Experts before. We've had people like Alfred Meyer who talk about the fiction that nuclear power and weapons are somehow separate. And yet at the same time, whether it's because we're all busy focusing on our own local issues, our own local work, we tend still not to work as collaboratively together as I would like to see. So I guess I would like to take advantage of your experiences, sailing 11,000 miles, to tell our attendees tonight, what's your impression of how the 2 movements are interfacing or getting along or complementing each other in the various areas that you have visited already?
We have seen everything from, there are communities there that are dependent on nuclear power for their jobs, to the strong no nuclear power and decommission correctly that we saw along the Northeast coast and around the Great Lakes. So the movement, generally speaking, is starting to understand the connection between the destruction done on the indigenous lands by uranium mining, the nuclear weapons and nuclear energy connection, and the fact that there's no place to put the waste from either one of these products. I'm seeing an evolution from just talking about nuclear weapons to talking about everything. And so even though some in some places, people are kind of slow to come onto that idea that it's not just nuclear weapons. And of course, the biggest danger of the whole nuclear thing is the nuclear weapons, because that could end at least civilization, if not humanity. So that's why we focus on the weapons.
Yeah, so the mission statement of the Golden Rule includes opposition to both nuclear weapons and nuclear energy very clearly. However, we have emphasized the nuclear weapons side more, a lot more. And in fact, in some cases, we've been a little somewhat discouraged from raising the nuclear energy because there's people who were easily concerned about the danger of nuclear war who still believe that somehow nuclear energy is a solution. So rather than tackling that head on, I would confess that we oftentimes avoided. When we got into the Middle East and the Great Lakes, it was avoidable because there's so many people there who directly impacted by the dangers posed and actual already health impacts from nuclear energy plants, nuclear power plants. And I think, and then of course, you can't have nuclear weapons without having the plutonium from the nuclear power plants. So there is a connection that we, including the Golden Rule and Veterans for Peace, be making much more, and with your encouragement and support, David, in any, I think we will be doing that.
Could I follow up on that, Jan, with your permission? And then we'll go to Janice. Yes, and please, if you have questions, start queuing and queuing up. It's more an observation, and I say this because we do have people from Pacific Northwest on the call. What your boat did here was provide an opportunity for community. I mean, a lot of us, I think, feel cut off or isolated or in our little silos, and we wonder if there are others in the rest of the world who really care. And just having the boat here, hanging out, talking, doing the presentations we did, brought together some groups that had never really met each other face to face. And that was one of the magical things, I think, of your visit to Chicago, and I'm sure many of the other places you visited. So as you folks on the online here tonight are hearing, when they come to the Pacific Northwest, you have a real opportunity to build a very unique kind of community, and I hope you take advantage of it. So thank you both again for that.
Thank you for saying that, David. And it's so true. We found it wasn't necessarily our plan or our strategy. We're not organizational geniuses or something, but the boat and the history of the boat and the whole effort to keep it going inspired so many people and did bring together, in many places, coalitions that actually formed to plan for our events and that are still working together that hadn't worked together before. So we're so pleased to be able to be part of that.
Well, thank you for that answer. And now we'll call on Janice Wilton, who has made this an international meeting. She's from Canada.
Hi. Yes, I'm in Ontario, and I just kind of want to talk about the small modular nuclear reactor situation in Canada. And because I know there's always the link with the weapons. I know we supply uranium and things, but basically in Ontario, we have a government that has kind of gone ballistic on nuclear. The refurbishing two plants in the right outside Toronto, the old Pickering plant is like, I think it was opened in 1969, and they're going to even refurbish that one. And there's also 4 small modular nuclear reactors that are going to be built on the Darlington. These are both in the region outside Toronto where I live. And then on Lake Huron, they're also wanting to put 4 small modular nuclear reactors at the Bruce, as well as enlarging the Bruce. So there's certainly no direct connection with nuclear weapons, and they're still going ballistic on the small modular nuclear reactors. I think it's really important to focus on that, because what I learned during the pandemic was that with Mark Jacobson, the professor from Stanford, was wonderful. I was so happy to hear him. I was so lucky. He was like speaking everywhere on Zoom calls, and that we don't need nuclear and we don't need fossil fuels. And I still hear people will back off on the argument of that we need nuclear energy to deal with the climate emergency. And that is really coming to the forefront, that that's just almost like a gimmick. I'm calling it myself a what do you call it, greenwashing, because it's come down. Jan has sent a couple things out. I know Beyond Nuclear sent out a thing, and the David Suzuki Foundation. It's really coming to the fore that nuclear small modular reactors, it just sucks money away from renewables and conservation, and people could be putting all that stuff around their homes and getting heat pumps, and like because we're talking in Ontario spending 400 billion, this is Canadian dollars, on the energy system up to 2050 with this government, and 100 billion of that on nuclear, which is insane as far as I'm concerned. But I was just wanted, I don't know if I'm asking a question properly, but I just wanted to say I'm really concerned about the fact that this idea that, and it's been very etched in. It's just like, it's very etched in that to the minds of people that nuclear is a solution. I mean, that's been the propaganda for decades. I mean, Ontario's had this since, as I said, 69. That really needs to be overthrown, and really overthrown quickly, because it's just, I mean, we're in a big mess as far as the climate situation is concerned. What was it? 50 degrees, over 50 degrees in India in some places today. We don't have time to fiddle around with playing around with small modular nuclear reactor games. You know, we need to put our money and resources where the most can be done quickly, and that's renewables, etc. Anyway, that's my spiel. Thank you. Sorry, got going on.
Oh, that's
Oh, that's
okay.
great. It's good to hear what's going on in Canada. Yeah, well, it seems like these projects, this push for nuclear against all the facts and against the economic viability, you'd think it would collapse on its own, but it's being artificially kept alive by those who will profit, and who would postpone actual renewable, sustainable energy efforts. And yeah, so we have to keep on pushing. My understanding is that even the SMNRs are not economically viable and will only survive with major government handouts. So it's like our governments are being asked to subsidize a really unsustainable and dangerous energy source, instead of, as you say, putting it into the renewable resources that we need, like yesterday.
If I could add real quickly, the German Environment Agency put out a statement, I think end of 2023. I have it and I can send it to David and he could share, that says that we don't need nuclear to meet the climate agreements. And in fact, it would be a detractor to meeting them.
Okay, we're going to now call on Carolyn Kroom.
Hi. I did want to mention, I think the movie that you all were talking about was Atomic Bamboozle. But I do have a question. I missed much of the presentation. I usually don't forget to tune in at 7, but I forgot today, and I'm really sorry. So if you've already talked about it, I'll just wait for it to come out on, that this recording come out elsewhere, and I'll listen to it later. But I'm not very familiar with the connection between nuclear energy and nuclear war, nuclear weapons. And one thing I did read, and I understand this connection, is that tritium has been made and may be continuing to be made in the United States at a commercial nuclear power plant where the tritium is put into nuclear weapons. And I don't remember the nuclear power plants. I think it's in Tennessee or something. But anyway,
It's Watts Bar at,
What?
yeah, Watts Bar in the TVA. Mhm.
okay, and that is a commercial nuclear power plant, right?
It is. It
Okay, all
is.
right. Okay, so I simply would just like to hear what the other connection or connections, and we don't have to go into great detail, but what is it about, what other things about nuclear power directly promote the nuclear weapons? I just
One
don't
thing that-
understand that.
One thing that comes to mind is like the export of nuclear energy technology, for example, that the US has initiated now with Saudi Arabia. Well, once the country has the ability to make nuclear energy and create the plutonium and other key components for nuclear weapons, then it's not too many steps from that before they can make a nuclear weapon. So the US is now, by selling nuclear energy technology to Saudi Arabia, is enabling Saudi Arabia, with all of its problems, to become another nuclear armed state in the Middle East.
I would just go back very, very briefly that there are also, they share in common so much: processing, uranium mining, uranium milling, transportation of radioactive materials. The uranium hexafluoride production that is then used to spin this gas down and enrich uranium, it's only a matter of degree. As well as Gerry said, the use of commercial reactors to make plutonium and heavy water, tritium, tritiated water for two components of nuclear weapons. And then they both share the problem of waste disposal, both during every bit of the process of making them, but then also when we're finished with them, either from the contaminated fuel rods or from having to decommission the nuclear weapons, whose plutonium is then stored at the Pantex plant in Texas.
Yeah.
Okay,
and-
thank you. Can I just clarify one thing that you?
Sure.
Okay, so commercial power plants create plutonium and then the plutonium actually goes into the nuclear weapons? Is this happening in the United States?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And the commercial nuclear power plants never would have even come close to being economic if they couldn't have sold their plutonium, because that was one of the things that kept them going. There's just so much information about this. It's really interesting. Okay, Roxanne, please ask your question. Roxanne Thayer, you need to unmute.
Sorry,
Oh,
I'm on a cell phone, so I had to get back to the actual screen. I think it was already asked, so thank you. And somebody noted in chat about indigenous nations, and they just railroad them, basically. They just railroad. Thank you.
So now Janice has already asked a question. So if somebody else wants to raise their hand, I would call on you. But
Jan,
it looks like Janice has got the floor.
Jan, one moment.
Yeah.
There is a question that was put in chat. What positive actions taking place in the area of nuclear disarmament? And that's from Beverly Richardson. So if you want to take that one.
Okay.
I see, as far as nuclear disarmament is concerned, the main progress that's being made is just what China and Russia said at the Beijing Olympics, which was a joint statement re-emphasizing that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. But I also see that Russia and China continue to reach out to ask for bilateral agreements or multilateral agreements from the United States and others, but primarily the challenge is to get the citizenry of the United States to understand the danger of nuclear weapons and how to pressure our government to move forward, even to respect the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is to negotiate for an end to nuclear weapons in a fast manner.
So at the activist level, there are some good campaigns have been launched and are ongoing in the United States. There's a lot of support for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Many cities have signed resolutions. Many cities that the Golden Rule visited signed proclamations welcoming the Golden Rule, but also calling for the federal government to support the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Back from the Brink has a substantial campaign, not only pushing for negotiations to ultimately rid the world of nuclear weapons, but to take measures to step back from the brinks, such as declaring no first use, taking weapons off hair trigger alert, eliminating the president's sole authority to launch a nuclear war on his or her own, and ending the $2 trillion nuclear weapons modernization program that's going on right now. There's also bills in Congress to that effect. 2 bills that we have been supporting. Helen, you want to say more about those?
Yeah, sure. There's HRS 77, which is the Back from the Brink bill. And then there's the Eleanor Holmes Norton nuclear abolition and bill, which she's introduced many times. You can get more about that through prop1.org. And, you know, I would say another tactic that's being used, though, is to show up at shareholder meetings with one share and start educating the shareholders. Go and demonstrate in the streets. There's direct action you can take. You can show up at banks that support nuclear weapons. You can show up at nuclear weapons manufacturers, laboratories like Lawrence Livermore. There are so many different targets for nonviolent direct action if that's your thing.
Well, it's interesting the way that the student protests against the genocide in Gaza have evolved. They're not only calling on their universities to divest from Israel-related products, but also from U.S. weapons manufacturers, of course, many of which are profiting.
You know, I think that this discussion that we're having is a discussion from NEIS, and it's not about current events in the world right now. NEIS doesn't take a stand on what's happening in Israel and Gaza. And I just wanted to say that because not everyone agrees with this point of view. And it's become an important thing in NEIS that we try to direct the discussion to subjects that are more appropriate for who we are and what we're doing. So if you don't mind, I'd like to get off the topic of the current wars and things like that.
Okay, well, we've said enough about that, I guess. Veterans for Peace has a very strong position calling for no more U.S. weapons to Israel. So, but if the people want to speak about other things, that's fine.
And because Janice has already asked a question, I'm going to call on Carolyn Treadway. And keep your hand up, Janice, because at the end, if there's time, we'll call on you. Okay. Carolyn, you go ahead, please.
Okay, so this is out of phase, but I wanted to say it before the program ends and before other speakers speak again. I thought it was a good time. I remember the first sailing of the peace boat into Micronesia. Was it 57 or 58, you said?
58, and the one that actually made it to Micronesia was the Phoenix.
Phoenix of Hiroshima, right?
So we are Quakers, and we have Quaker friends on both those boats. And I get a little confused about which one was on which boat. But I wanted to speak because it's very moving to me that you still have this ship, this wonderful Golden Rule ship, going around the world educating people. And you came to Olympia, and I met you and talked with you and was part of that program that night, and went on the Peace Boat, which was an absolute thrill for me. And we couldn't take a little sail as you offered because the wind did not cooperate. But I have remembered that evening so fondly. And I just want to commend both you, Helen and Gerry, for all you do and all you've done and all you will do. And I love that little boat.
Well, we're coming back to Olympia, aren't we, Helen?
Yes, we are. We'll be there. Yeah, we'll be there for the Friday, August 14th vigil, and then walk over to Traditions Cafe from there to have a little bite to eat and a presentation. But I also would like to acknowledge that Quakers are still involved with the Golden Rule Project, and we do try to get the local Quaker meetings to either invite us to their meeting for an event or to come to one of our public events. Yes.
I hope to see you.
Thank you. Me too.
I'm hoping to see them up there too. So, anyway. Okay, so we've got now Stephanie. Please ask your question.
Hello, good to see you guys. So much fun when you were here. I've got my shirt, just not wearing it tonight. And you know, the reason that the Golden Rule and the Phoenix first sailed was to try to stop the testing in the islands. And now there is an important bill that is being held up in the House of Representatives, RECA, Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. And the legislatures, I think, are back in session this coming week, I think. And they and they have, you know, this week to get it brought to the floor for a vote, because nothing can be done until they do that. And it needs to pass because those people injured by the testing, not only in the islands, but in New Mexico. There was a documentary, First We Bomb New Mexico. And we also, I guess, over the summer, we did this. That was silent fallout. The people from Missouri were affected, and they're trying to get more added to RECA, but it's
one egg. I need one egg.
So
Roxanne, Roxanne, could you please mute? Roxanne?
I'm going to put something in the chat.
I was muted.
It was in the South Dakota Searchlight, and it's in regards to them bringing up issues that people in South Dakota have. So I'm just going to add that, and there's a letter in there that was quilled, as Jan said, and it was signed by 8 other House of Representatives. This just needs to pass. Thank you. That's all. It was not a question. It's just about RECA.
As a point of information, the House will be in session until June 5th, which is a Wednesday next week. So that's your timeline. They'll be in there. They'll be in Washington the 3rd, the 4th, and the 5th.
Okay, unless somebody else, does anybody see in the chat questions that we could bring up? So anyway, because other people aren't raising their hands, we're going to call on Janice again.
I'm still on the small modular nuclear reactor situation, which Dr. Romana who's an expert with the University of British Columbia, says they're not small, they're not modular, and he really doesn't have anything good to say about them. But what I wanted to say about what these reactors, like there seems to be a big push in Canada and the States to sell them around the world. And my understanding, and David and Jen, maybe you could correct me, I thought I'd heard Dr. Gordon Edwards say that every reactor creates plutonium. I know in New Brunswick is another province that has a nuclear reactor and is also getting 2 small modular nuclear reactors. And one of them is a molten salt reactor. And I know that some American experts have sent letters to Prime Minister Trudeau expressing their concerns about this for proliferation. So if the idea is to sell these reactors all around the world, there seems to be a big push, and it must be just a money thing, then I think that's a huge concern. That it's not like, yes, Iran, the concern that it would get a big nuclear weapon or something, but if these small modular nuclear reactors are being sold all around the world, that gives all these other countries a potential to make bombs. I don't know if they'd be a big bomb. I don't know about that, but that's just what I wanted to say about this concern about proliferation, especially with that molten salt reactor. Thank you. And thank you for your work so much. It's wonderful. I know you went through the Great Lakes. I wish I'd known. I would have gone into, if you'd stopped in Toronto, I might have gotten in there. But yeah, you must be seeing these reactors all around those Great Lakes. So thank you very much for your work.
We actually did sail to Toronto. Sorry we missed you.
So Beverly asks an interesting question. What can we do in our town to follow up on the visit of the Golden Rule? And I think that the biggest thing that I think you all could do is to start working with others. It's a lot easier and a lot more effective if you can either join an existing group or form one, or form coalitions of groups so that people are working on various aspects of this. It's a huge topic, as you know, and so whether it's New Smyrna Beach or somewhere else, I think that it's a good idea for us all to share strategies, share materials like flyers, posters, ideas, things like that, so that we can, use each other to not reinvent the wheel, but to make every voice more powerful.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. Okay, it looks like Roxanne's up again.
Quick question. In working with the Columbia Riverkeeper, who do a lot of intensive research on nuclear power, particularly SMNRs, I understand that there are only 2 functioning in the world, that they are not technologically figured out yet how they'll work, that they produce, as someone else said, 2 to 30 times more waste than the larger ones. Could someone speak to the fact that there's all this money going into SMNRs that are not really even functioning yet technologically?
We've been sold a bill of goods, and the only way out of that is education. And it's hard given the media, the mainstream media interaction with the rich people who think nuclear is good and the government that wants nuclear so they can have their weapons, to fight against all of that whole complex. But I think that people are starting to get a little bit smarter and pay more attention to non-mainstream media. So we need to be out there to give people the education they need when they're ready for it, and to just give them a little nudge further along the road towards not accepting small modular reactors.
Yeah, and then the point that someone's already made here, but worth making again, I think, is that not only are nuclear energy not a safe and sustainable form of energy, but it's stealing it. The money that goes into developing and promoting nuclear energy is stealing funds from what really needs to happen right now, and that is to put major investment into truly sustainable energy sources, and wean ourselves not only from carbon and oil and gas, but also from nuclear.
Yeah, I think you've mentioned that's one of the ways that nuclear power makes climate change worse, because the money that we should be putting into renewables is going to nuclear power. And in addition, they take at least 10 years whereas renewables can be put up in 2 or less. And so all of that 10-year time, we're pouring carbon dioxide into the air when we could be spending the money and saving the time and getting carbon dioxide under control. And I'm going to call on Elizabeth Lee. Please unmute and let's hear your question, Elizabeth.
And I'm trying to audit. Okay, fine. I'm from Canada, and yeah, you and me both. And what was so wasn't strange, but I knew that there was a reason there was a shutdown, and it had nothing to do with COVID, because immediately after COVID and Canada opened up, all this came to the fore, like everything we are dealing with, and it was deliberately done because people were so busy just surviving. And that's why they've been able to get pushed through. And SMRs, it's all about making weapons. It has nothing to do with energy, and it is the most extravagant, and it's done by only a few people, and it's a zero thing. And so basically we need to make up, I think, a cheat sheet that says all this nuclear crap and what's happened with the indigenous group that initially was contaminated by a nuclear site on their land decades ago still hasn't got the complete healing center, Grassy Narrows, I think it is, or something, and something like that. I can't remember right now, in Ontario. And so they want to put again one of these places to dump all this waste on the watershed of their shore, even though they still haven't got their compensation and their healing center and all the facilities they were supposed to get when the people from Japan came and said, you have many managed disease, what we got after the Second World War. And not only that, in Japan is the only country that supports all this making nuclear, and how they had that huge contamination, and then they've all dumped it back into the oceans and everything, because their scientists say we have to do this. So in Japan, they have to do it. There is not one country in the world that says, yeah, we'll keep doing it till we do it, and we won't even worry about if we ever come to any resolve. And that's as simple as it is. It's a make work project for people that want to do this kind of thing and people who want money. It's really criminal at every level. And if we could just have a proper sheet to sort of express these big grandiose thoughts into modern language, we would have a bit of an audience, because we did in the 60s and 70s. There was a huge...
Yeah, that's something that NEIS might want to provide us, a good, simple fact sheet, because the facts are overwhelmingly on our side here. And then those simple facts could easily be turned into letters to the editor.
Yeah.
And kind of a massive re-education campaign, if you will.
And also to ask the question, why now? They've had decades to do this. Why now? And, you know, also I was on CBC last night and I listened to this most amazing man who did, he's just written a book about fire and the history of fire, culturally, spiritual, all the rest. And he said that our fires are going to get so hot, and all our society is built on fossil fuel. Everything you buy has something to do with the fossil fuel industry. And now we're going to have nuclear. So everything's going to melt. Nobody will be alive. And so when I listen to him, I'm going to read his book, but when I listen to him and I listen to this, we have to be really like talking to a 4-year-old almost, in such a way, and very descriptive, because we should stop fossil fuels, because if in Fort McMurray, there was places that just were obliterated. They don't exist. And that will be done on a global level. And he talked about the heat from the fires go up to the clouds, and the cloud becomes a storage of all this energy, and it just moves along and goes somewhere else. And then it's global. And so those two things, fossil fuels, which is evil, and nuclear, which is evil, we need to kind of coordinate them as one big ball of hell and make it so that people understand and educate ourselves how we can say, well, it really means this, right? Or it really means that. And I think for me, because we're just killing people at every level right now in India, like they can't hardly work. It's so hot. It's like they say when you go outside, it's like somebody slapped you in the face. And
Yeah,
so,
well, Elizabeth, I think we have to
sorry,
appreciate very much your comments and understand how you feel.
yeah.
And this is why we need a weapon of mass education. But I did want to point out that we are at to 8:21, and the meeting theoretically closes at 8:30. We can go we can go on as long as the
This was all I want to say. That was the only thing that was important to me. Like, I
right.
know what you're saying. I understand.
Okay. Well,
My last paper at university was on this whole bit, and it's all smoke and mirrors. It's all.
well,
Really
don't
is.
think we don't appreciate your comments, Elizabeth, because we do. Um, so we do have 20, well, it looks like 18 minutes left in the meeting, unless things go on and our presenters are willing to continue. But right now I'm going to call on Dave because he's got his hand up.
These are some responses which I think would be useful, but I'm going to bring this up to you, Helen and Gerry, since you're going to go to the Pacific Northwest. Since we have a number of Canadians on the call, they are very much aware of a man called M.V. Ramana, who is probably one of the preeminent small modular opponents, and he appears in that movie Atomic Bamboozle. He's located at the University of British Columbia, I think in Vancouver. So I believe somehow you guys got to hook up with him as part of your tour.
Thank you.
That would be one.
We are going to be sailing Vancouver, British Columbia, and Victoria.
That would be an incredible.
So we'd love to be put in touch with him well ahead of time.
Yep, we'll do that. The other thing is an observation, and I'll share this with y'all. On June 7th, NEIS turns 43, I'm sorry to say. And we've picked up ways of reaching people over the years. And one of the analogies I've tried to use is something that people can understand in their daily lives. You know, they don't understand RADs and REMs and, you know, contamination and all this. But when it comes to small modulars or nuclear, I use a parallel example that the nuclear hucksters are very much like used car salesmen in the sense that they will only talk about the positive things: chrome bumpers, white wall tires, 0 to 60 in 8 seconds. You never hear the negatives. The flip side to that, though, is that in a sense, we're like adolescents who are buying the car for the first time. Meaning, if it's red, if it's fast, and it's a convertible, let's go with it. And again, let's ignore things like insurance or mileage or maintenance and upkeep. So what I'm trying to get across to all y'all here is look around in daily life and look at these kind of hooks that people can really grasp and understand. And when you put that parallel out there, people start understanding that the emperor is quite naked. So feel free to make up your own or run with the adolescent buying a first car and the used car dealers and see what you get. So I'll stop there.
Well, one of the arguments for nuclear energy, for extending it at least a while longer, is that somehow we can't get to sustainable energy resources fast enough to maintain our needs for electricity at this point in time. And of course, that's all the more true if the resources are going into nuclear and not into sustainable. But I think that's also a false argument. But part of it is based on the premise that the human race will continue to use its current level of electricity and greater, that demand will continue to grow. Well, that is unsustainable in itself. And it may be true that sustainable energy in the short term or even the long term cannot maintain the level of energy requirements that are currently on this planet, and of course growing on some less developed countries or developing countries, you could say. So, part of the challenge is, and part of the ultimate argument, and maybe the ultimate solution, is we have to change our lifestyles and reduce our energy consumption if we're going to be able to have a sustainable path forward.
All right. Does anybody else have a comment that they would like to make? Well, I always have a comment. I'm pretty hard to shut up. I'm just now putting it in the chat. There was a book that came out 2 or 3 weeks ago called Petroleum 238. And this book is by a young man named Justin Noble. And it is an expose, and really a searing expose of, number one, the fact that fossil waste was declared non-hazardous by the EPA or by somebody in, some law in the United States. And from that time on, we have not been allowed to realize the amount of nuclear, the amount of radioactivity that comes to us, not only from fossil fuels and the methane that you burn in your stove in your kitchen, and the waste that comes out of fossil fuels, but it collects for various reasons in various spots, and many people have been negatively affected by it. So, excuse me, please. So I really recommend that book, and that's my comment. And I'm going to let Janice make another comment, but it is 28 after the hour, and we should be closing up shop pretty soon. So
go ahead and close up shop. That's fine.
Well, I'm going to turn it over to Dave, and he can decide these
Janice, go ahead.
ponderous
You get
questions.
the last
Yeah.
word.
Okay.
What I wanted to say was thinking of a ship and the marvelous experience of being a ship all the time. These small modular reactors, I can't get off this kick. What I've been thinking about with this is that the Great Lakes, we've got droughts in so many parts of the world. What Elizabeth was talking about, the Western Canada is in drought. The fires are going on all through the boreal forest. There's droughts in so many places. And on the Great Lakes, and nuclear reactors are almost all on water. They have to be on water to cool. But on the Great Lakes, we have such a gift. We have 21% of the world's surface fresh water in the Great Lakes. 4 of them border Ontario, and then of course Michigan's in the States. And to think of putting experimental small modular nuclear reactors, 8 of them, 4 on Huron, 4 on Lake Ontario, taking a risk like that to the population, to the water. Ontario is a source of drinking water for 9 million people, and it's just that's what I want to say. It's just a bad idea.
As far as I know, almost every nuclear power plant is located on water because they need to produce steam and cool the fuel rods with water. So most of them are on large bodies of water. Yeah, thanks.
And what do they call that where you are being more cautious? Oh, there's a name for it. Anyway.
Oh, the precautionary principle or something like that.
Precautionary principle. That's it.
So,
Jan?
Dave, can we call on Timmy?
Yes, I was going to say we have one
What
more
about
question.
Helen and Gerry? Is it okay
Real
with you?
quick, real
Okay.
quick. Several years ago, it was during the Bush administration. they wanted to do live firing over target shooting, the military to be firing whatever weapons on the Great Lakes. And they, anyway, we went to a meeting up in Waukegan, and well, damn it, they stopped. I mean, they just did not go ahead with the proposal because there were so many people outraged. And here you go, to protect the Great Lakes. Yeah, people will really speak up. That's all.
Thank you, Timmy. So I'm turning it over to Dave, and Helen and Gerry can make final comments if you'd like, but let's see what Dave has to say next. Oh,
You're muted, Dave.
My final comment is to say thank you, and it's just to say how great it is to see you again, and that you have terrific plans for the Pacific Northwest coming up. And we'll get you some of the contacts for Ramana and maybe some of the other folks out that way. So, you know, we wish you a safe voyage.
Right.
I will mention that our next night with the experts will be on June 27th, which is the fourth Thursday in June. And we are seeking to have an expert on the HALU fuel, the high assay low enriched uranium. Her name is Tammy Thatcher, and she's written a blistering 63-page paper about it. So we hope that'll be an interesting one. And the following month, we're actually looking to have an expert on issues about challenging relicensing of reactors and what that means for the climate issue. So it'll be nukes and climate change for July. So we hope you'll put that on your calendar and join us as well. So I will ask Helen and Gerry, you have a last word or a last comment you want to leave?
Yeah, I'll go first.
Go ahead.
Thank you again for inviting us. This was a very interesting, and we learned a lot. It's some well enthusiastic outreach voices here, and hopefully we'll all be. I hope that we do end up with a simple fact sheet that'll enable us to write letters to the editor, etc. And oh, one more thing I wanted to mention is that Veterans for Peace, the Nuclear Abolition, also has a web coming up on the third Thursday of June. That's Thursday, June 5th. And we'll share that information with you. We have three great speakers, Linda Pence Gunter, nuclear, Greg Mello from the Los Alamos Study Group, and William Hartung, who's a U.S. nuclear spending expert and expert on the weapons industry. So that's coming up. Coincidentally, with the same name that we had here, we kind of borrowed it, Nuclear Energy and Weapons in a Time of Rising Tension. So that's on, once again, on 20th. Are we able to put the registration link in the chat, Helen?
I will send it out.
Okay, we'll send it out, and hopefully NEIS will share it with you. And we'll look forward to tuning into your future webinars as well. It's great to have this kind of discussion. Yes.
I am really happy to be here and to see so many people that I have met along the way, whether it be along the West Coast or around the Great Lakes or anywhere else along the Great Loop, including Georgia. So thank you all for being here, and I look forward to continuing the conversation and sending out some information from us to Dave to share with you all as well. Thank you very much.
And we will be happy to share that with people. We will send out the chat to you all tonight, those of you who registered. And at some point, we will get the link from Zoom and hopefully get this up on YouTube as soon as possible. So safe travels, people. Hope to see the rest of you in June. It'll be summertime then, so be ready. Thank you all for coming tonight. And thank you, Jan, for co-hosting.
Thank you.
Yes.